On August 10th, a powerful earthquake tore through western Colombia, and by the time rescue crews finished counting, more than 130 people were dead. 4 days later, on the other side of the world, the ground near Flores Island in Indonesia broke loose with a magnitude 7.7 earthquake, followed by more than 200 aftershocks in the first 24 hours alone. 2 major earthquakes, 2 different continents, just days apart. And once footage of both disasters started spreading online, a very specific claim started spreading with it. The claim was simple, and it was frightening. It said the world had entered an earthquake outbreak, and that the next 48 hours were critical. That claim is not true, at least not in the way it sounds. But the real story behind it, the actual science of why earthquakes sometimes cluster together like this, and what experts can and cannot predict, is honestly more interesting than the fake countdown ever was. So let's ask the real question properly. Is the Earth actually going through an unusual earthquake outbreak right now? And if so, what does that really mean for the days ahead? To answer that, you first need to understand something most people never think about. Earthquakes are happening on this planet constantly, not occasionally, constantly. The United States Geological Survey estimates that millions of earthquakes occur every single year, most of them too small and too deep to ever be felt by a single person. On any random day in 2026, monitoring services typically log somewhere between 1 and 2,000 earthquakes above magnitude 2, spread out across the entire globe. That number alone tells you something important. A handful of earthquakes happening in the same week is not unusual. It is the normal, everyday behavior of a planet whose outer shell is broken into moving plates that are always pushing, grinding, and sliding against each other. So the real question is not whether earthquakes are happening. They always are. The real question is whether what happened in Colombia and Indonesia this month represents something genuinely unusual, or whether it just looks unusual because 2 serious, high-casualty events happened to land close together in the news cycle. Let's start with what we actually know for certain. On August 10th, 2026, a magnitude 7.4 earthquake struck western Colombia, centered near the country's coffee-growing region. This was not a minor event. It was serious enough that Colombia's government declared a national disaster. At least 132 people died, and more than 500 were injured. Entire buildings collapsed, including parts of a hospital in the city of Cali. Emergency crews worked for days digging through rubble, and the United States committed over $15 million to help with the recovery. This alone would be a major news story in any given year. But 4 days later, on August 14th, a second major earthquake struck Flores Island in Indonesia, this time measuring magnitude 7.7. The shaking was followed by an intense wave of aftershocks, more than 200 of them within the first day, with the strongest reaching magnitude 6.2. Emergency responders confirmed dozens of deaths, and the total continued rising in the days afterward as search efforts continued. 2 earthquakes, both above magnitude 7, both causing real confirmed loss of life, only 4 days apart. It is completely understandable why this felt alarming to people watching the news. But here is the part that matters. Earthquakes above magnitude 7 are not actually rare on a global scale. According to long-term data, tracked by the USGS, the planet typically experiences somewhere around 15 earthquakes of magnitude 7 or higher every single year. That works out to roughly 1 every 3 to 4 weeks, on average, somewhere on Earth. Having 2 of them land within the same week is not the planet breaking its usual pattern. It is simply the normal statistical randomness of a process that never actually runs on a perfectly even schedule. Some months bring 0 major earthquakes. Other months, purely by chance, bring 2 or 3 close together. Both outcomes are consistent with the same long-term average. This is where the story could have ended calmly, with a simple explanation of statistical clustering. Instead, once footage of both disasters started circulating, a different narrative took over online. Some accounts began claiming the 2 earthquakes were connected, part of what they called a global seismic outbreak, and predicting that a much larger, more dangerous earthquake was now due within the next 2 days. Here is why that specific claim does not hold up. Conclusion has remained remarkably consistent the entire time. No scientist, no government agency, and no monitoring system on Earth can currently predict the exact time, location, and magnitude of a future earthquake with any real accuracy. The United States Geological Survey states this plainly and repeatedly in its own public materials. Earthquakes cannot be predicted, not by scientists and not by anyone else. And what scientists can do is something different, and it is worth explaining clearly because it is genuinely useful information, even though it sounds less dramatic than a countdown clock. After a major earthquake occurs, seismologists can calculate the statistical probability of aftershocks happening nearby over the following hours, days, and weeks. This is based on well-established patterns seen after thousands of earthquakes throughout history. Generally speaking, the chance of a significant aftershock is highest immediately after the main earthquake, and that chance gradually decreases as time passes. though it never drops to exactly zero for a long while afterward. This is exactly what happened after the Flores earthquake in Indonesia. The more than 200 aftershocks recorded in the first day were not a mysterious new threat. They were the expected, scientifically understood behavior of a large fault system releasing built-up stress in a series of smaller adjustments after the main event. Aftershock sequences like this can continue for weeks, sometimes months, gradually decreasing in frequency and strength over time. So when someone claims a specific 48-hour window is critical, they are not describing real seismology. Real seismology talks in terms of probability and likelihood over broader stretches of time, not fixed emergency countdowns. A seismologist might say there's an elevated chance of further aftershocks in the days following a major quake. No legitimate scientist will tell you exactly which 2 days carry the danger, because that number simply is not knowable with current technology. Now here comes an important and completely separate question. If earthquakes truly cannot be predicted, then why do these two disasters feel like part of the same story? Why does it feel like something bigger is happening? Part of the answer is simply human psychology. Our brains are built to notice patterns, especially frightening ones, even when the underlying events are statistically unconnected. 2 major earthquakes happening in the same news cycle creates a powerful emotional impression of a trend, even when the actual data shows nothing unusual by historical standards. But there's also a real geological piece of this story worth understanding, because it explains why earthquakes often seem to arrive in clusters without needing any mysterious outside trigger at all. Both Colombia and Indonesia sit along what geologists call the Pacific Ring of Fire, a massive horseshoe-shaped zone stretching around the edges of the Pacific Ocean, where multiple tectonic plates are constantly colliding, sliding past each other, and diving beneath one another. This single geological feature is responsible for roughly 90% of all the earthquakes that occur anywhere on Earth. It is also home to the vast majority of the planet's active volcanoes. Because so much of the world's seismic activity is already concentrated along this one enormous zone, it should not be surprising when multiple significant earthquakes occur within it during the same general period. It is not that one earthquake is somehow reaching across the globe and causing another. It is that both regions sit inside the same extremely active geological system, a system that is essentially always under stress and always capable of releasing that stress somewhere along its length. This detail matters because it replaces a scary, unexplainable mystery with a clear, well-understood scientific reality. The Ring of Fire is not becoming more dangerous overnight. It has operated this way for millions of years, producing major earthquakes on a fairly consistent long-term basis, whether or not any single week happens to draw international headlines. At this point, it's worth returning to the actual global data, because it tells a calmer story than the online panic suggested. Seismic monitoring services tracking worldwide activity classified the overall global earthquake level in the days following these 2 disasters as moderate, not extreme. On a typical day during this period, monitoring networks recorded around 7 to 14 earthquakes above magnitude 5 worldwide, alongside close to 100 above magnitude 4. Those numbers sit well within the planet's normal everyday range of seismic background noise. In other words, the specific week that produced 2 tragic high-casualty earthquakes did not actually represent an unusual spike in the planet's overall seismic behavior. It represented 2 individually serious events landing inside an otherwise fairly typical stretch of global activity. This still leaves an important, very human question. If a major earthquake truly cannot be predicted, what should people living in earthquake-prone regions actually do with that uncertainty? The honest answer from earthquake scientists is not to wait anxiously for a countdown that will never arrive. It is to focus on preparation that works regardless of timing. Securing heavy furniture, knowing the safest place to shelter during shaking, having emergency supplies ready, understanding evacuation routes if you live near a coastline that could face a tsunami. These steps matter every single day you live in a seismically active region, not just during some falsely predicted 48-hour window. It is also worth being fair to the genuine, serious science that does exist around earthquake risk, because there is real, valuable research happening, even without exact predictions. Scientists can and do identify which regions carry higher long-term earthquake risk, based on the history of a fault line and how much stress appears to be building along it. This is why building codes in places like Japan, Chile, and California are specifically designed with earthquake resistance in mind. That is not prediction in the dramatic countdown clock sense. It is long-term risk assessment built from decades of patient, careful data collection, and it genuinely does save lives when it is properly applied. There's one more thread worth pulling on here because it goes directly to why claims like the 48-hour warning spread so easily in the first place. In the hours after both the Colombia and Indonesia earthquakes, a wave of unrelated theories began circulating alongside the real news coverage. some claiming connections between the earthquakes and completely separate events like ordinary solar activity or minor magnetic disturbances. These theories are consistently unsupported by mainstream seismology. The United States Geological Survey and the broader scientific community have found no confirmed causal link between solar activity and the triggering of earthquakes. The physical mechanism actually responsible for earthquakes is far more straightforward, if less dramatic. It is the slow buildup and sudden release of mechanical stress deep within the Earth's crust, a process governed by rock, pressure, and time, not by anything, happening 93 million miles away on the surface of the Sun. So, coming back to the central question this video opened with, has an earthquake outbreak truly arrived, with the next 48 hours representing some kind of critical turning point? Based on everything real seismologists, real monitoring agencies, and real historical data actually show, the honest answer is no. What has genuinely happened is two separate serious and tragic earthquakes, occurring within the same general region of the planet that produces the vast majority of the world's seismic activity, landing close together in time, largely by ordinary statistical chance. That does not make either disaster any less real or any less devastating for the families in Colombia and Indonesia who lost loved ones or homes this month. Their loss is completely real, and it deserves attention on its own terms, without needing an invented countdown clock to make it feel significant. What the science actually tells us is both less frightening and, in its own way, more useful than a fake prediction ever could be. Earthquakes will keep happening, in clusters and in isolation, largely without warning, for as long as the Earth's tectonic plates continue their slow, restless movement beneath our feet. The right response was never to watch a clock counting down toward a specific, unknowable hour. It is to understand the real risk in the places where you live, prepare steadily for it, and trust the actual scientific consensus over whatever version of the story spreads fastest online. The ground beneath us has always been moving. It always will be. The difference between fear and genuine understanding is simply knowing which parts of that movement science can actually explain, and which parts, even now, remain honestly, permanently unpredictable.